there, I'm Tom Cheswick, and this is part of the camera crash course. Yesterday we had our first hands-on class, and this is a quick recap of what we did. The very first thing we had all the students do is take out their camera, turn it off, take out their card, turn the camera back on, and try to take a shot. That was from our first class, remember? We wanted to change the menu setting to make sure our camera would not shoot without a card, where we would run the risk of losing important images. So everybody passed that, and that was excellent. So then we put the cards back in, turned on our camera, and we were ready to start shooting. So the next thing we did was adjust our white balance for the situation we were in. We were in an overhanged area, so it was very much a shaded area. But most of us found that was too warm. And by adjusting our white balance presets, we found that shade was too warm, but cloudy worked out really well. So that's what we did for white balance. Now there are ways to do custom white balances to get precise white balance. One is the expo disc, and that's where you take an exposure with this covering your lens. This actually turns your light meter into a incident meter instead of a reflective meter, so you can get the exposure as well as the white balance. However, different manufacturers set white balance different ways, and we didn't go into how to do it for each of the cameras. So whether you had a Sony or a Nikon or a Canon, if you want to set a custom white balance, be sure to read up on that and get the expo disc. It's a great way to set your white balance. What we did do though, so people could get perfect neutral colors, was to use the Weibel. So everybody took a test shot of the Weibel card, and that way you could go into Lightroom or Capture One or On1 Photo RAW and set a custom white balance using the eyedropper tool and clicking on the gray card. So using the Weibel card is a great way to get accurate colors. Next, we concentrated on the As If exposure guide. As If is a great way to set up your camera. And As is for aperture, S is for shutter, I is for ISO, and then F is for flash, which we weren't using, so we didn't have to worry about that part. This way we got our correct exposure. And we played around with that. I gave some tests, so we went to ISO 800 at 5.6 at 125, and all of the students, including myself, went through and made sure we knew how to set the aperture, the shutter, and the ISO on our cameras. And everybody did great. If you weren't at the class, be sure to try it out, because you want to make sure you have control and you can set the aperture, the shutter, and the ISO to get that exposure triangle and to know you're going to have proper exposure. The next thing we did was look at ways to meter a scene. We used an incident meter where it is looking at the light falling onto the scene. This is a great way to meter for portraits. It's a harder way to do it if you're doing a landscape and the mountain is not in the same light as you are. You need really long arms. Kidding aside, all you do is point this towards the camera, take a reading, and it's going to give you your aperture, your shutter speed, and your ISO. All three things you need for your as if exposure, and a perfect way to set your exposure settings. Next, we took a look at this calibration target that we used at the last Wednesday class. This is a great way to set exposure if you don't have an incident meter or the expo disc. What you're trying to do is to get 2 peaks in your histogram, one on the right side, one on the left side, and having those evenly distributed, and that's going to get you a great exposure, especially if the whites aren't being clipped and the black isn't being clipped. However, I couldn't find any of these for sale. So I made something up, shared it with the students, and you can make one at home as well. All you need is a piece of black paper and white paper. I made mine with an 8x10 folio for a photograph, and all you would do is put white on one side, black on the other side, move your camera to crop it as close as possible, and you're trying to get those same 2 peaks. One on the right side, one on the left side of your histogram, and making sure neither side is clipped, and you're going to have a great exposure. So you don't need an expensive incident meter, although I love it. You can get by without the expo disc, though I love that one too. But this is a very convenient way to make sure you have accurate exposure. The next part of the class was all about confidence, having confidence. We've talked about this so many times. What's going to help you be confident before a shoot? Well, I share tips that I've used all throughout my career. First thing I do is before any big event is to lay out my equipment the day before the shoot. So if I'm photographing headshots or a dancer on location, or even giving a workshop like this, I test out my equipment, I lay it out, I know exactly what I need, I make sure the batteries are charged, and test out the cameras. Make sure I have plenty of flashcards, and if it's something that I do often, like headshots, I have a checklist that I go through and make sure that I have each piece of equipment that I know I'm going to need for the shoot. Next thing I do is envision the shoot. I think about the location I'm going to be, what room I'm going to be setting up. If it was a wedding, I would think about the church. What areas on the grounds are awesome for photographs? What time of day am I going to be there? How is the lighting going to be? Just to share with you a real world situation, Anne-Marie, Jeff, and myself met at the Hilton earlier this morning to look around the grounds to pick out places to photograph. We're not leaving anything up to chance. We know we're going to have a shoot there next Saturday. We walked the grounds, we picked ideal spots based on how far we could walk in a certain amount of time, how the lighting was going to be, how to get the most variety in one area, and pick the best of several different locations. That's what you want to do. You want to be prepared. It gives you so much confidence and truly helps you on your photo shoot. So the next part of confidence is showing up at the shoot, being ready, being prepared, going through the steps we've already outlined, setting your white balance for the situation, whether it's a custom white balance, whether it's a gray target card that you're going to use later, using one of the camera's preset, like cloudy or shade or fluorescent or tungsten. As if, set your exposure. So choose your aperture. Do you want a lot of depth of field or do you want a shallow depth of field? Pick an aperture based on your artistic idea of the shoot. Right now I'm shooting at f4. I know I'm going to be barely in focus and the background's going to have a fall off. So your attention is on me. Shutter speed. Are you hand holding or are you setting it on a tripod? Herb gave us a great suggestion about shutter speed and hand holding. His recommendation was based on the focal length of your lens. So if you're shooting with a 50mm lens, don't use a shutter speed lower than a 50th of a second. So if you're going to do a 200mm lens, don't go lower than a 200th of a second. And that helps you ensure that you have a sharp, shake-free image. I pointed out that that's a great starting place, but a lot of it's going to be based on the person. So if you drink a lot of coffee and you shake quite a bit, I would actually recommend doubling that. So if you're using a 50mm lens, don't go below 100th of a second for your shutter speed. If you're using a 200mm lens, don't go below 400th of a second. Also, the wider the angle of the lens, the easier it seems to hold it steady. So a lot of times when you're shooting at, say, a 24mm lens, it's easier to hold that down to, say, 1/4 of a second or even 1/8 of a second. But with a longer telephoto lens, every little movement is going to show up more. So that's again why for a 200mm lens, 400th would be the least that I'd want to go below. But there's also in-body image stabilization now. Lenses also, many of them have stabilization. So a lot of times you can beat those numbers. So test them out, try it out. Hold your 200mm lens, take shots of several things, and see how slow you can get down. Remember though, at some point, if you start going slower than say 1/60th of a second, you may be able to hold it still, but the person you're photographing might move ever so slightly or start to blink or something, and that motion's going to show regardless of image stabilization. The last part we went over for that confidence is to pre-visualize the pose before you approach the model. One of the things that I've seen so often is you finally get that chance to photograph and you rush up when we're in the workshops or any of the hands-on shooting experiences that the AZPPA offers, and you've seen the model do so many different things, and then you go up and you start off with a super hard pose, right? Like, okay, put your hand under your chin, and they go like this. Just doesn't look right. Or lean into your hand, and they push up their cheek, and it doesn't look good. Or it's just an awkward type pose. Start off simple. And that's what we went over in our class. We defined 2 different types of poses, a feminine pose and a masculine pose. And from there, you can go off of any numerous types of poses from that. But the foundation is all the same. And it was very simple. For a masculine pose, we turn the body towards the light. We kick the back foot away, so they're leaning their hip away. Kick the front foot forward, have them stand up nice and tall, and you have a great shot just like this. I'll back away and do the same thing. For a feminine pose, we turn the body away from the light. We kick the back leg back, just like before, pop the hip towards the back, stand up tall, and then nose towards the light. Don't I look awesome? Here it is again, very simple. The light is coming from this side. For a masculine pose, turn the body this way. Have them kick back all their weight on their back leg, push their hip back this way, stand up tall, and head towards the light, or nose towards the light. A masculine pose looks great on men as well as women. For a feminine pose though, sometimes it's not gonna look that great on a man. For a feminine pose, body away from the light, weight on the back leg, up tall. They should be able to lift their front foot because all their weight's on their back leg. And then all they need to do is turn their nose towards the light and look back towards the camera. And that's going to give you a very nice S-curve. Very flattering. So there was a bit of confusion. People wanted to know, so is it for a masculine pose, do you put the left foot back or the right foot back? That doesn't matter. It matters where the light is. Okay, so let's go over those rules one more time. Masculine pose, turn the body towards the light. Which foot now is closest to the camera? It is my right foot. The weight goes on the back leg, so that's my left foot. If the light was coming from this direction, it would be the opposite. My weight would be going on my right leg when I'm facing the light, but the light's coming in from this direction. Weight on the back leg, pop the hip back. Should be able to lift up the front foot, in this case my right foot. Turn face and nose towards the light. And you have a great masculine pose. Feminine pose, just the opposite. Body is away from the light. Light's coming in from here, body is this way. The reason this works so well too, especially for brides, is now the bodice of the dress is in shade, so you see all the detail in the dress, all the beadwork and everything. You won't see that if you do a bride in a masculine pose facing the light. All this is just going to get burnt out. So, great pose for brides, great shot for anybody you're trying to give a feminine pose to. Body is away from the light, weight is on the back leg. Doesn't matter right or left, it's the back leg. Up tall, and then nose towards the light, and you can bring the eyes to the camera, whatever you want to do, but it's going to look awesome. Okay, and then with the hands, they can play around, they can come up, all sorts of things that you can do. We'll get more into posing later on, but it gives you the two base poses to start out with, to get that confidence. You know, it's so easy. Do I want to do a feminine pose? Do I want to do a masculine pose? And then set the person up and start having fun. All right, see you guys Wednesday.